In the early 1990s, a man named Ted Chiang would take a seat in an audience and watch a play that deeply resonated with him. The production was titled Time Flies When You Are Alive. It was a one-man show, written and acted out by Paul Link, and it chronicled the story of Link's marriage, his wife's fight to overcome cancer, the miraculous birth of their daughter, and the untimely death of Link's wife. By all accounts and most reviews, the play was an emotional journey that very quickly and deeply rooted itself in the hearts and minds of its audience, Ted Chiang included. And very similar to Ted Chiang's experience, I too deeply resonated with the fictional work when I sat down in an audience. Except my experience happened in 2016, when I carved 2 hours out of my day to watch Arrival. Now, keep in mind, 2016 wasn't just any regular year of cinema. It seemed that every few months, there came a film that wowed audiences, brought tears to their eyes, or blew them away. But even standing among this field of stiff competition, Arrival remained my favorite movie of the year. There was something deep inside of me that latched onto Arrival's topic of language and communication. As a writer, I think that is all I'm really trying to do at the end of the day. Use language to communicate with others as best I can. Likewise, as a therapist and a lover of psychology, the movie's adherence to the idea that language can change the brain on a perceptual level immensely intrigued me, and still does to this day, mainly because it's true. Depending on how, when, and why you learn language, the lobes of your brain will physically change to accommodate your specific communicative style. This is called linguistic relativity, or the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. With all that being said, I can honestly say I left out of Arrival stunned. I sat down expecting nothing more than the simple fare of Hollywood alien ho-hum, but instead, I was punched in the gut by a sci-fi movie that was far more heartfelt and ambitious and staggeringly competent than I thought Hollywood was ready to produce. I had to figure out exactly what happened in the creative process to result in a script like this. And when I went looking online, the answer first appeared to be embarrassingly simple, and then morphed to be jarringly complex. The simplicity came by learning that Arrival was not, in fact, just a Hollywood script. It was an adaptation of a novella written by an author named Ted Chiang. Of course, I thought, no wonder the movie was so deep and complex. Books allow a creator tens of thousands of words to craft an idea and have the attention of their audience for hours, or even days. With the nuance and complexity of a book guiding the way, all the film had to do was take those same principles and themes and put them on the screen. But then that is where the jarring complexity of the situation came in. I had to think and consider that just because a movie is based on a good book doesn't mean that the movie will be good. There have been countless novels, well-received novels, well-written novels, that have been adapted into lackluster movies. I believe that, inarguably, something changes when moving from the page of a book to the screen of a theater. You could have the exact same characters and scenes down to the words, but convey and communicate a completely different message. Some adaptations are nothing more than silent, empty husks of the source material they are based off. Now, if you are interested in the technical editing of dialogue and film that went into adapting Arrival, I would highly recommend checking out the video that Lessons from the Screenplay did on the subject. It is a wonderful video essay about the specific differences between the source material and the film. However, what I want to look at in this video is less about the detailed editing and more about the artistic expression that goes into understanding written work and then adapting it to something on the screen that carries the same message. I believe Arrival is the perfect movie to explore this question, not only because it is an excellently adapted film, but because its sole premise is focused on conveying information with purpose and using language to communicate across mediums effectively. And when considering how well Arrival works as a book-to-film adaptation, don't just take my word for it. Take the word of Ted Chiang, author of Story of Your Life, the novella that Arrival was adapted from. He has said, "I think it's that rarest of the rare, and that it's both a good movie and a good adaptation. And when you consider the track record of adaptations of written science fiction, that's almost literally a miracle." Ted Chiang's fear is not unfounded at all. Sci-fi has had a bit of a problem going from books to screens. But to understand how Arrival was properly adapted to the screen, we should first look at the process of how its source material came to be. Language is based upon understanding, and there is no way you can properly communicate something without understanding it yourself. Well, as I said in the beginning of the video, when Ted Chiang saw Paul Link's one-man play, Time Flies When You're Alive, it deeply impacted him. He was fascinated by this tale of a man dealing with his wife dying from debilitating breast cancer. The struggle that Paul Link presented in his play of having the knowledge of death and the inevitability that comes with it inspired the events of Ted Chiang's eventual story, where Louise, the protagonist, would have to deal with the inescapable knowledge of the death of her daughter and losing her marital partner because of it. Even after coming up with this concept though, Ted Chiang studied linguistics for half a decade before writing his novella. This was because the language and communicative side of the narrative was just as important as the characters and events of the plot, and Ted Chiang wanted to make sure that if he wrote a narrative with a linguist as its central perspective, he did it right. Fast forward to 1998, and Ted Chiang finished and published the novella to much praise, awards, and attention. One such person whose eyes were caught by Chiang's work was Eric Heiserer, a Hollywood screenwriter. When Heiserer first read Story of Your Life, he had to put it down and stop. He has said, "It had a very profound emotional effect on me. I was in tears, and I was both heartbroken and uplifted. I had to walk around the block a couple of times afterward and just hug my friends." And that feeling that Heiserer talked about did not fade in minutes, days, or even months. Story of Your Life affected him so profoundly that he spent years trying to adapt the book into a film, only to be turned down time and time again. One of the people to refuse him was director Denis Villeneuve. When given Story of Your Life to read, Villeneuve told Heiserer, "It's powerful, but it's so literary. It's a gem, but it's not a movie." Refusing to give up though, Eric Heiserer did exactly what Denis Villeneuve thought couldn't be done. He turned the book into a movie. Or more specifically, a fully fledged script. That was a turning point for Villeneuve too. He has said, "I was very impressed by how Eric was able to crack the way to create a cinematic, dramatic structure out of it." But that was still just the beginning. For Villeneuve to fully commit himself to adapting the written work, Heiserer had to convince him of the concept that it made such an impact on him. So for 6 weeks, Eric Heiserer and Denis Villeneuve had dozens of meetings concerning language, time, philosophy, science, and politics. And for all that work, Heiserer eventually got his way, convincing Villeneuve to sign on as director of the film. And listening to these two men talk about the film years later, you can clearly understand how kindred their minds became on what the film meant and how it had to be adapted. Heiserer has said, "I think the biggest challenge was maintaining a balance of heart and mind. There's a specific alchemy there. You can't give short shrift to either." Denis Villeneuve has said, "It's a very delicate movie. You have to make sure the intellectual aspects do not block the emotional ones." Both Heiserer and Villeneuve are communicating a fundamental understanding of the fiction's message, and I believe it is here we can dive into the key feature that goes into making a well-executed adaptation. It's not enough to think that the source material is cool, or that the source material is marketable enough to provide large profits. If an adaptation is made for those reasons, you will most likely end up with a product that resembles the countless other slogs that Hollywood churns out on an annual basis. No, it is my estimation that to create an honest adaptation of a written work, your understanding of the material and your emotional connectivity to it must be in line with the original creators. Ted Chiang did not write Story of Your Life because he wanted money or recognition. He wrote it because he was viscerally, emotionally impacted by Paul Link's play. Chiang internalized the message and language of Link's work and authored a story that embodied those ideas to share it with others. Likewise, Heiserer and Villeneuve became deeply invested in the message of Chiang's book and wanted to share it with the rest of the world, not because of a pursuit of personal success, but because Story of Your Life communicated a message that intimately affected them. And this thorough understanding and love of the source material is not something that is only ephemeral or figurative. You could see the care manifested in how the writer and director duo handled the creation of the film. Just like Ted Chiang spent a half a decade learning linguistics to write his book, Heiserer and Villeneuve employed renowned scientist Stephen Wolfram to consult for the film, along with phonetic expert Morgan Sonderegger, syntax and linguistics expert Jessica Kuhn, and 3 other language experts from McGill University. Their passion for proper representation brought them to consider such minutiae as the terrain that surrounded the alien ships and how close they would hover above the ground. This is the second key to properly adapting a book to film. Not only must you understand the source material well enough to communicate its messages to others, you must care about the nuances of the material in the same way that the original creator did. But all this is not to say that Heiserer and Villeneuve should think exactly like Chiang. That wouldn't work, because they aren't communicating with their audience in the same way that Chiang was with his novella. Where Story of Your Life presented itself in a literary fashion, Arrival was visual, and Heiserer and Villeneuve had to make changes accordingly. From the book to screen, they altered the perspective from which the story was told, the timeline of events, the importance of certain characters, and pivotal plot points, all in the service of trying to communicate the core message of Ted Chiang's book through a different medium. But the biggest changes actually concern elements of the narrative that Heiserer and Villeneuve did not agree on, despite their shared understanding of the source material and the nuances within. Villeneuve has said, The ending Eric imagined at the beginning was quite different and was more about technology and less about language. He agreed with me that it could be a good idea to go back to the root of the short story, which was about the idea that the main gift of the alien would be language. He came back very quickly with strong ideas. What persisted at the center of Villeneuve's and Heiser's film was language and the gift of communication, and that is always what they went back to when in doubt. The heptapods gifted Louise with their language. Louise used language to convince the Chinese military to stand down, and then gifted that language to the rest of the world. This theme of gifting language and communication had the opportunity to become so prevalent in the film because Heiser dealt with it personally. After reading Story of Her Life, he said, "Obviously I recommended the book to everybody, but there's a way to transplant that to film and then carry it to a larger audience. That's the gift there. That's the real gift that I would be able to give if I could manage it. It was all caught up on just making sure that I could communicate that feeling." When working from a novel to adapt film, Denis Villeneuve has said, "You try to keep the essence. You try to keep the poetry alive." Adapting written work to film is much more complicated than just writing a script that mirrors the source. It takes a true resonance with the spirit of the work, an understanding of the details that went into its creation, and the artistic ability and wisdom to properly represent the message on the medium you have chosen. But most importantly, an adaptation should not be done in service to oneself, but as an act of sharing a creator's work as a gift to others.